in sport or in clinical practice, to build trust, you need two things. You need authenticity and vulnerability, right? And for us, that authenticity piece is just the work we've done in sport over the years. Now, our biggest challenge is a lot of that we can't even talk about because some of the biggest clubs and the biggest athletes in the world are taking our product, and you might be able to see it by the color of the drink, but you're not going to see necessarily the label because we're, still a young company. But that authenticity piece is huge for us, and we'll keep telling that story. And then I think the vulnerability piece is at a one-to-one level, it's, letting your guard down a little bit. And I think that's where, as a brand, trying to find that sweet spot of let them understand that, even the best athletes in the world struggle with things that all of us humans struggle with, right? Like whether there's challenges at home, whether it's as simple as, hey, that lady who's an Olympian, she struggles with eating the right thing at breakfast too.
Welcome to Long Run Labs, a weekly podcast from the team behind For the Long Run podcast, telling the stories of those running the outdoor industry where endurance and entrepreneurship meet. This episode is supported by our newest partner, Halo. If you've been listening, you recently heard Hillary, Halo's founder, and Monica from Rabbit get into exactly this in our July 28th episode. Halo is a hospitality platform built by runners for the way people actually travel to races. They work with brands, event organizers, and leagues to fix one of the most operationally painful parts of any event, which is lodging. If you're a brand, Halo turns a hotel into your home base at a race, a branded clubhouse where your athletes and community actually stay together, the experiential piece done right without you managing hotel logistics from scratch. That's the Rabbit playbook. If you're an event organizer or a league, Halo houses your people, locks in better rates, and layers in real community and perks, so the lodging becomes part of the experience instead of a headache. And if you're just heading to a race yourself this year, it's worth a look too. Same platform, better rates, real community, and perks from their brand partners with a lot less hassle. If any of this sounds like you, reach out to their team and tell them you heard about Halo on Long Run Labs, or shoot me a note and I'll connect you directly. We are here in Boulder with Dr. Marc Bubbs. Marc, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Appreciate it, Jonathan. Man, it's been great to be in Boulder. First time, and excited.
So we've known each other for a while. We most recently interacted when you were with the Atlanta Hawks.
Yep.
And Insight Tracker was doing some performance labs for the Hawks.
Yeah.
And here we are a few years later, and you're part of a new budding company that just sponsored Boulder, and you're out here for race weekend, and we had some events together, and so we're going to dive into the business of nutrition. We're going to do some talk about building a company. We're going to talk about your performance nutrition background. But the first question of this podcast is always a tough one, and that question is, who is Marc?
So appreciate you having me on. I'm a performance and clinical nutritionist, so I've been doing it 25 plus years in team sport, elite sport, and then also on the clinical side. And so over the years, that just bleeds into being at the coalface of seeing what the real problems are for folks. And it's been amazing over that time to see kind of a complete lack of information was the problem initially. You fast forward now and it's too much information is the problem. And so, it's been great to be able to, impact people's lives, whether it's on the sporting side or the clinical side. And then that's just bled into, into the entrepreneurial work with ProBio, performance nutrition company. My co-founder, Paul Winsper, longtime performance pro, 30 plus years, worked in the EPL, worked with big companies like Under Armour, leading their global performance. And we really wanted to just solve real problems. I'm sure that you've seen over the years, so many things come out that are all about the sizzle and all about the novelty of things that are trending, and not really enough about solving an actual problem that's, that you face all the time. And so it's been great to be able to have that concept of like, okay, we want to be able to tackle this issue. And then, like a lot of things, be able to bring it to life, work with great people. And so, we spent the first 18 months at ProBio just selling into pro teams and athletes, getting the feedback, again, looking through the bloods. And that's really where we started to realize we were onto something, when the feedback of just the compliance factor, the taste factor, the simplicity, but also underneath that simplicity, a lot of complexity with the product itself. But you always want, as a practitioner, the end instruction for the client or athlete to be straightforward, right? You don't even want it to be really complex, because then people just struggle to maintain it. So it's been fun. And then since November, we're direct to consumer now, really focusing on the endurance. And so it's been, we've obviously connected over the years with working with teams and getting the labs done. So it's been cool to be able to see what the work you're doing now in the endurance space and connect here in Boulder.
So you basically summarized your synthesis of how a product makes sense, or the why behind a product, based on your decades of experience in seeing the friction of all these other products out there. I want to wind back to you getting into pro sports. You've worked with Canada basketball, you've worked with Olympics, you've worked with the NBA and other organizations. What was it about that level of sport that you wanted to be a part of?
Yeah, I think going back initially, I worked as a strength coach during my studies, and that idea of, this is going back into the late 90s, early 2000s, like nutrition wasn't still on people's radar really, unless you were a dietitian. But you could see on the general health side, people were struggling with weight gain and issues that just, moving more and eating better was something that could impact them. You could see that in real time as a personal trainer, as a strength coach. But even back then on the medical side, it wasn't, doctors weren't trained in that, and, still aren't to a large degree, and didn't have a focus there. And so, being able to see the impact of that and how nutrition impacts, we talk about type 2 diabetes, prediabetes. We've got almost 50% of the population now in North America considered pre-diabetic. A third or higher are now hypertensive, so blood pressure's high. Metabolic syndrome, this constellation of factors in terms of high triglycerides, LDLs out of whack, these types of things. And so when we look at some of the big levers, the training, lifestyle, nutrition, on the clinical side, that was something that really, caught my interest. And then, of course, I'd grown up playing sport my whole life as well. So being able to work with some of the best, athletes. And so one of the clinics that I worked in, Sam Gibbs, who's the performance lead at Canada Basketball, he also worked in that clinic. This is going back, 20, 25 years. And so we gelled in having a more holistic model of how to wanting to support athletes. And this notion of really trying to support their overall health and foundational health. And back then that was a pretty novel concept, right? Because even in endurance, if you're a female elite endurance athlete, it was just assumed you're going to lose menstrual function. That was just sort of the cost of entry to being elite. Whereas now we have all the science to show that women who maintain menstrual function, which effectively is a proxy for health, outperform the others. And so, that was the big initiator. And since then, I've been really lucky. I've consulted with organizations like Canada Basketball, US Soccer, been in with different leagues, teams with leagues, helped to build better systems and processes for their staff to be able to, assess and implement. And then working with individual athletes still, procure chefs for them, do all the lab testing like we would do at Inside Tracker. And it's nice when if you're lucky enough to be able to work with a private chef, because then all the strategies and things that we want to do that typically are challenging to nudge even the best athletes to eat this, not that. And, when you have a great chef delivering the end product, it's, it makes it really easy.
What does the change in the performance nutrition space look like over the last decade? What have you noticed from a trend evolution standpoint?
I think first off, it's just the term performance nutrition now is well accepted. Whereas if you said that 10 years ago, people kind of wouldn't understand exactly what you're talking about. I think on the performance side in sport, it's been amazing the change over the last even 15 years, because as we got into all the NSF products, it used to be fewer and further between. You can get products that were tested, right, for banned substances.
Yep.
And prior to that, it was always a real struggle to be able to pick out certain brands, and then the worry and whatnot. And so the fact that there's more informed sport or NSF supplements kind of shows that. And then, that term performance nutrition, it's funny now when the younger athletes come in. When I first started, we used to not.
They're expecting it, right?
They're expecting it, right? They know, and they know about it. We got 13-year-olds talking about protein and eating kale and whatnot. Whereas when I first started out, the veterans on the team, those were the guys that would start asking about it, because it's typically when when you're young and you're getting away with things, you don't necessarily want to double down.
Right.
So in sports, typically when you get to your late 20s, early 30s, but the real X factor now with the young athletes is that they're even in their teens and early 20s, the ones that are switched on are starting to put the habits in place. Because ultimately that's what we want. We want people to build the habits so they can just repeat it enough that it's just what they do. And they don't have to walk around with a list of I'm supposed to eat this much protein, I'm supposed to eat this many meals. And it goes the same for clinical executive clients, right? Typically at the start, people tend to want to have this exhaustive list or feel like they're doing, a real extensive protocol. And all that's fine. We do lots of extensive testing. But again, 20 plus years of working with folks, when you drip feed things on and allow people to integrate into their lives, you get long-term success, right? When you give somebody a huge protocol in 30 days, they think it's going to stick. And then by the end of 30 days, they're doing half of those things well. 60 days later, they're doing 20% of that well. And these are people who succeed in their own lives, right? These are the type A's. And it just shows you that it's tough in the human aspect of the real world to be able to change what you eat or exercise more or all these things, right?
I was having a conversation with someone today. So I consult for a company called Eternal, and Eternal has just released an app where you can push in your blood data and it gives you guidance, and you can push in your DEXA, it gives you guidance, all sorts of stuff. And a guy asked me, he's like, why does this concierge program not cost $25,000 like all the other ones? And the difference between like functionally useful and conventionally like sexy programming is in that gap, right? It's like the thing that actually works is the fundamentals and the eat, sleep, move relationships, and the stuff that sells that is catchy on Instagram is the peptides and the supplements and I don't mean like basic supplements. I mean the experimental type stuff.
The shiny new toy.
The shiny new toy. Versus doing the basics. So you've spent your whole career in helping athletes improve, right? And you've distilled all of that down to like behavioral science is the most important piece of all of it. And you actually have to be able to help somebody do the thing. Why do you think we're so stuck on that final 1% when the majority of people are dealing with metabolic dysfunction and they're not moving enough and like all these other things when they're chasing the 1% when they should be focused on the 99%? And I ask that also covering the running community who is looking for the workout that will get them there, or and not the sleep, not the nutrition, not the mental health.
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking for something outside to be able to think there's this kind of one thing. And it's interesting because no matter how Cartesian someone is in their thinking, like I work with surgeons and partners in law firms and traders who in their day-to-day job, the way they think is very systematic, very process-driven. The challenge when you get into anything that's health-related is it's the emotional limbic part of the brain, right? You talk to any performance psychologist, mental performance coach, 90% of the decisions you make are all this limbic emotional. There's a great book with Chip and Dan Heath called Nudge, right? And they use this analogy of an elephant and a rider. And the elephant is your emotional brain, and the rider, the little guy on top, is the cortex, is the thinking brain. And that really provides you with the picture of like, if you think the thinking brain, the little guy on top of that elephant, is going to be able to steer that elephant, you got something coming, right? Like it's not. And so that's the notion of trying to create an environment and trying to nudge people towards the right behaviors is one of the reasons why we look for that kind of, shiny new toy or pull away from things, because it's, it's more difficult. It's more internal work to kind of go back to what's important in those big rocks. But you see it across all sports. You see it in the best athletes. Michael Jordan was an amazing athlete, but he was the basketball player with the most elite fundamentals. The best golfers in the world these days, like Scotty Scheffler, the guy works on his grip, which is what you learn when you're 5 years old. And that's the most important thing for him because it's a connection with him and the club. And so, I often refer to it as tightening the screws, and we got to continue to revisit things. And it's difficult because when I talk to people, two key things for me, there's not much you can automate in nutrition, but two key things are your total protein intake, right? Protein and meal frequency. And every time you talk about that with somebody who's, more experienced in nutrition or a more elite athlete, especially endurance, they kind of, you can see they're paying attention, but their eyes kind of roll over a little bit of like, how important can this be? And then, they complain of maybe low energy, achy joints. And then you say to them, okay, well, you're missing that one meal a week. That's 500 calories, right? So we're 7,000 calories every couple of weeks, 14,000 calories a month, 170,000 calories a year you're deficient in. Now all of a sudden, no wonder you're tired, you're sick.
That's a really good way to put it.
Right? So we took something that was just a tiny thing of like, yeah, I missed that snack at the end of the day. And this is why I'm like, okay, how many meals does someone eat in a day? The person should know. And we always get people to kind of number them off. And it can be 3 for some, it can be 6 for others. We got athletes eating 7, but just that idea for the general population, it helps because it doesn't just tell someone when they're supposed to eat. It also tells them when they're not supposed to eat. right? You got to get between meal 2 and 3 or whatever it might be, or you're not eating after dinner. And then for the athlete, it's the opposite. It's like, okay, you're supposed to eat 6 times today. You missed 2 meals. Okay. And then that's when you can then double click on those and go, where are we constantly missing or where are we struggling? Okay, let's put some strategies in. But that's that idea of getting back to the fundamentals. And it's amazing how once that switch goes, and you typically need to work with people for long enough, like the old system, even in medicine or clinical practice, is people coming in for one visit. And then you're sort of stuck with trying to impact them enough in one visit that they want to come back for more visits.
Right.
But so you're left with always this acute, whereas maybe like, it's got to be more than 10 years ago now or 15 years ago, we just started working with clients on a longer term basis. And we'd say, almost like a martial arts style, like you don't get to pass your yellow belt until you have the skills and then you get to go to the next belt. And it was tough initially with a lot of clients because they're so driven, but you're like, no, well, you're still not executing on whatever it might be, this breakfast or this late snack. But the nice thing is once they get that and actually do it, they start to realize that actually you can make a small change and then feel a big impact, a big difference. Where most people, especially in the general population, they're used to doing a lot and getting very little return on investment, right? They try to exercise more, they try to overhaul their diets, and they're not losing weight, or their blood sugars aren't getting better very quickly, or their blood pressure. And so once you get that little flip, and so there's a level of confidence and trust that's built in, then you can really, accelerate things. But just as you kicked off the question, it's tough to get people to kind of almost like a racehorse, like put the blinders on, don't worry about all these other things you're seeing. Let's just execute on the, what I call like the big rocks or the big buckets, because that's where you get the biggest effect.
So you take that and then you say, okay, I can keep consulting with teams, I can keep working with individual athletes, or I can co-found a company. What led to the latter being true?
I mean, I've been lucky in my career to cross paths with people with, similar mindset of viewing performance through this more holistic lens, and some pretty dynamic people that are doing amazing things, whether it's a guy like Sam Gibbs or Paul Winsper, co-founder of ProBio. He's 30 years in pro sport, did all the Premiership, MLS, ran a big program at Nike and then ran Under Armour's global performance for 10 years and still worked with athletes that whole way, all the biggest athletes in the world. And so I think like a lot of good things, it starts with that idea of we see enough things in the same way, but we also have, we cover each other's blind spots. And ultimately you want to move the needle. Like if you're in a certain area for long enough, you're not just trying to put something out there to, for a quick return on investment, which, hey, a lot of business people do. And you sort of, that's fine to a certain degree, but there's too many things that don't actually solve problems. It's just more stuff in the marketplace. So we didn't want to put something out there that was just going to be another drink, another this, another that. And that's where, I spent my whole career chasing athletes with pill packs, making them all up. You find them stuff between the seats of the plane or in the athlete's shoe. And as a practitioner, you're like, okay, this is tough because this guy's low in D and B and this is a problem. And, it's more difficult to solve for it. And so typically what we call an all-in-one, like trying to put all these supplements into one drink, practitioners always hated because they were never built for purpose, right? They were always built for, marketing claims and sizzle and to pull people in. But the science was always pretty, terrible to average. And so being able to put things in there that are best in class ingredients, like what do the athletes and just busy people need, right? Like some of the things that really move the needle, like what's the right dose of vitamin D, or can we use a type of magnesium that's really, best absorbed and can cross the blood-brain barrier for focus so we can actually see some of these outcomes. So putting that together took a long time because there's a lot of ingredients in it. There's no artificial sweeteners or flavors. And so because we have protein in there, amino acids, which is really bitter, I'm sure BCAAs, leucine, took ages to sweeten this thing. And so it does become like everything in the entrepreneurial world. You start out with enthusiasm and energy, you get bogged down in the minutiae. And you're like, oh, I don't know if we're ever going to get this thing off the ground. But, we obviously kept at it and we did. And it was great to finally, come to be able to get it into athletes. Cause at that level, until you get it tested, NSF, then you can't even share it with the athletes to get their feedback. And so Paris Olympics was the first one for us, the first real big one. Had a whole suite of different athletes taking it. And again, the feedback was great of just, guys that would typically never take pills, taking this drink, you're feeling better for it. You're looking at some of the bloods like we would do at Inside Tracker. We're seeing changes and we say, okay, we're on to something here.
This episode is brought to you by Popfly. If you're a brand trying to reach outdoor, travel, and adventure audiences, Popfly is where you should be running your creator program. It connects you with the largest community of adventure creators on the planet, people who actually use the gear, live the lifestyle, and have built real trust with their audiences. Popfly handles the whole operation. Affiliate links, discount codes, creator and ambassador collaborations, all in one place. No more chasing people down over email. You scale brand momentum, track what's actually working, and every mention comes from a place of credibility because the creators you're working with genuinely mean it. Go to popfly.com to check it out, and if you want to reach out to them, let them know that we sent you. If you're enjoying Long Run Labs, we'd love it if you took a moment to leave a review. It only takes a minute, but it helps the show reach more people like you. If an episode has helped you think differently about your business or career, made a long run fly by, or taught you something new, scroll down in your podcast app and tap those stars and write a review. Thank you for your support. We're all familiar with AG1 and how they grew, and a lot of the pushback on a company like that is, or the pushback of going broad in general is, if you're for everyone, you're for no one. And if you think of, a supplement mix that is attempting to work for everyone, it can't be personalized, right? And so I lived at the intersection of personalized nutrition for a decade, and at the same time, there were a handful of things that we saw all the time. It was like, oh, you're an endurance athlete? I'll bet with 75% confidence you look like this with your blood work. So how do you, your ingredient list is quite different than AG1's. Did you take inspiration from how they built their business and what they put out there? The positioning is a little bit different. The color is totally different. It's orange. It's not green. The taste is, I think, a lot better. How did you think about a personalized-ish approach, or an effective approach for something that people often think requires personalization?
Yeah, it's really comes down to a practitioner-led model, right? You're seeing it like a practitioner would see problems. And just like you mentioned, if you look at labs long enough, even if you're not a practitioner, right, like you would have seen at Inside Tracker, you start to see trends and patterns.
Yeah, magnesium, vitamin D.
So 20 plus years of doing that, you think, okay, these are the trends that we're seeing. Let's, rather than a couple things, the fundamentals are so key. And when we look across, whether it's training or nutrition, there are still, 2/3 of things, or even up to 80% of things, are common to all of us. The personalization becomes the additional bit at the end. And you could even argue the personalization becomes the execution for the person of what makes it stick for them. And so making sure that we put, rather than solving for 10 problems on those labs, like we just talked about, we see these trends, and you see it in the general population with executives, the same thing. And so rather than having a set of problems that then, if an athlete has an injury or somebody gets sick, there's more pill to come on top. Let's create a blend that just raises the playing field so that we've solved 80 to 85% of things. We're only left with a couple of things left to solve for. And so that's the difference, really, especially of being an all-in-one, of trying to say, we're not trying to solve every problem, but we know if we can raise the playing field, just like in the training setting, if you can get to a certain level of fitness, or if you can clean up your movement, so now someone can put you under load if you're squatting or deadlifting. That was the idea with the Pro One. And for us, with even a greens powder, like at the highest level, we really don't have good data that a greens powder moves the needle significantly in any direction. At the pro level, you would just get fresh pressed green juices to give to athletes, and typically we'd mix it with pineapple or apple or like something sweeter.
$5 a serve, $10 a serving,
and you get it in. Guys love it, and it's super easy. And so we have a fruit and veg blend that we put into our product, but it's got an RCT behind it showing it does reduce inflammation. But as you mentioned, the orange color that comes from the lutein, the CoQ10 that's in ours. So we didn't pick orange. Orange kind of picked us. But really it comes back to that practitioner-led model. Let's actually solve for things. That way, when people take your product, maybe they get their annual physical, maybe they're an athlete doing bloods every 8 weeks, 12 weeks, they can actually start to see positive changes that reinforce a lot of the subjective stuff, because, better energy, less cold and flu, less missed training days. Like, we're working with some of the biggest track and field groups in the world now, and the coaches are coming back just this last year, the fewest missed training days, fewest illnesses they've had in the last, 5-6 years. So that's the kind of stuff that for us, as practitioners, like, okay, we're moving the needle and we're seeing it not so just subjectively, but also in the data.
What it takes to be successful as an athlete is who can miss the least amount of training and who can string together healthy training for the longest period of time. And so you almost don't need any other validation besides anecdotally, we're training more. And if you can train more, you can be healthier. And if you're healthier, you can perform better you have a better chance of performing better on race day.
Especially in endurance, like you can literally, the research, you can separate out international level from national from regional just on who showed up the most. Now, it's not just what you're drinking from a nutrition standpoint, there's some other factors in there, but it's like you say, it's a huge one of like, if you are just missing days, and even now in the research, upper respiratory symptoms. So you talk to people, whether they're executives or athletes, they always think like, oh, I'm sick.
Yep.
Like, no, even just the symptoms of illness, so the scratchy throat, the dark circles, that predicts worse performance. And so, just like you said, yeah, if we can keep you coming up, feeling fresh and or just being able to show up, that's a huge driver. And it's the same in entrepreneurial life. You got to be able to show up all the time to be able to actually succeed. There's a great quote in the special forces, which we do more and more work now with. And it's like, no one's coming. It's up to us, right? Like there's no backup plan. We got to be there. We got to show up. And so for us at ProBio, it's kind of a similar thing of being able to work with people, whether it's athletes or clients.
You've taken an approach that I'm starting to see more often in go-to-market strategy, which is partnering with elite athletes for validation and seeing it trickle down from there. Other examples, Cole Zucker from Kilo Runs, they make an insole that you use your phone to take photos of your feet, and then it produces an insole for you. And so I had him on the podcast. He talked through working with Tom Evans, for example. And he was like, I'm only interested in working with elite athletes and only interested in engaging with influencers and media as a way to elevate the elite athletes that I'm working with. I'm consulting with a company called Hydro, and they make blood flow restriction shorts. And the guidance I'm giving to them is we need to put this on the bodies of pro athletes who will tell amateur athletes that this works. And they've used it clinically in a $5,000 use case that was a pain in the ass. This $300 use case is much better. Yeah. You as an amateur should try it too. And so beginning to see this, or we're not beginning to see it, this is a model that works. Why did you feel that model is what will help move the needle for ProBio?
I mean, for us, it wasn't even choosing a model. It's just who we are, like just being authentic to what we do. I mean, we spent 25 years with athletes, so it just became a natural extension. And I think the benefit that we had is just that authenticity, so that when we came to an athlete and said, hey, I think we should try this because it'll be impactful for you, they weren't worried about different angles. They're just like, okay, we're going to try this because, this is a solution that can help. And so that's been massive because across all different sports, male, female, different sports, different athletes, we had such a wide breadth, which is typically you don't see, especially in our domain of like nutrition. Typically it's, you make a certain amount, you sell, you make a certain amount of revenue, then you get the athletes, then you get, we've really flipped the model on its head. And because we come from it, have just gotten it into the best of the best. And then, like you say, if it can impact them, then we're onto something. And I think, again, for the executive or for the general population, sometimes they think, well, I'm not an elite athlete, so how does this relate to me? But, training load is the thing that stresses the athletes, right? For the rest of us,
workload.
It's a little bit of training load, but it's life load, workload, right? It's like the kids at home, it's the long work days, like that load, especially without your own personal trainer, with your own chef, your own massage therapist, your own physio, like that's a lot. And so that's when you get to these commonalities. We call it a human first model, which is, again, if we take care of the person and they're healthier, you can adapt from your training better, you can be more resilient, so that you can show up. For the athletes, it's showing up on game day. For the rest of us, it's showing up at home or at work.
So you launched to consumers at the New York City Marathon last fall.
Yeah.
What was the biggest surprise?
I mean, that was, I'd worked with Sharon for many years, Sharon Lokedi, the, past champion at New York. And so it was cool to even be there with her. We brought her to the event show floor, and she had never been to the event show floor before. So it was really interesting just to see her take on that. And of course, we did some cool interviews where she shared her stories and how the products helped her over the years. I mean, she was on it for 18 months before we'd gone, released D2C. And just how it resonates with people. So you took us over a year to flavor it naturally. And it's great when you get over 1,000 people pass by the booth and try it. And, 80% of them are saying, geez, that tastes pretty good. Because at the end of the day, as a practitioner, if you don't have compliance,
Right.
which is consistency, you're never going to move the needle with nutrition or with training, right?
So one of the things that I ran into with Inside Tracker constantly and working with practitioners is they would look at something like vitamin D as an indicator of compliance. And so, like, can you open your mouth and put this pill in your mouth and swallow? If that thing can help improve testosterone, sleep, mood, mental health, like all of these things that vitamin D unlocks. Are you seeing any response related to compliance, or are coaches looking at it from a compliance standpoint? Like, can you drink this, and are they seeing better compliance than with pill-based supplements?
Well, that was a big one for us because when we had some longitudinal data from an NBA team, 15 guys, you could basically pick out the 2 guys who weren't compliant because it's just what you said. We can move the needle on many markers, but vitamin D, because it's a fat soluble vitamin, it sort of sticks to you better than the water soluble ones, which go in and out. And so you can really match up that compliance factor. And that's what we started seeing. And you could see it in the coaches too. The coaches would start taking it. They're under a huge load. They're staying up late. They're getting up early. They're on all the flights. They're typically older. And so, yeah, that's a huge part of it. And just being able to show the athlete, because the athletes are being asked to do a lot of things and life's really busy for them. So sometimes if you can't connect the dots of like, hey, you did this thing, whether it's a recovery modality, a training modality, or nutrition strategy, like to tie that to some type of benefit that they're seeing. And so I think that's where the nice thing when you talk about some of this compliance, you can show them some of that data and you can start to tie it back to, the chief goals or concerns that they had, which often run around like lower energy, recovery, inflammation, getting sick all the time. Like these are some of the big ones that you hear. I'm sure you heard over and over again.
Yeah. So how do you close that feedback loop, right? That's the holy grail that everyone's chasing, which is the features and benefits, and then the validation that it's actually working, because that's how you move someone from paying for something once for $100 to you're now on a subscription model.
Yeah.
And now you're a $1,200 a year customer instead of a $100 once a year type customer.
Well, it's certainly one in the clinical side, it's building that trust with the patient or the athlete that then allows you enough time and space, or basically allows them to listen for long enough to kind of appreciate that,
Right.
those benefits. And so I think that's always the challenge with a business as you're scaling, how do you replicate that one-to-one model, that practitioner model at more scale? And so I think that's where, it's trying to marry up. It's really exciting what we can do now with AI and everything else. But I still think the human factor is what separates people when they're making these kind of life decisions of trying to improve their health and taking things. And so that sort of Venn diagram of trying to marry those two things up is where we're currently at with trying to figure out how we can really, show people. But yeah, between that and them just being able to see subjectively and objectively with the data, that's kind of the
And feel
sauce.
better in theory, or just notice that they're not as sick, or they're able to train more.
Well, that's just it. And if you take something that you don't mind taking, and you have that almost confidence level that you're ticking all the boxes, because people are constantly, especially if you're even interested or more interested in health and nutrition, and you see this with athletes all the time where they're always looking around now on the socials of like, what about this? What about that? What about this? And you realize the best athletes in the world, the really elite ones, they don't do that. Once they establish their rhythm, they just put the blinders on, and they don't, you might get the text and they ask you, but they're not getting drawn into that almost a level of doubt and stress that's always like, maybe I'm missing out on something. Maybe I need this other, which actually leads to a lot of stress response. And it's tough to then execute on, we often say, keep the main thing, right? Like if you're getting pulled off piste all the time with these things, it's a challenge for sure.
So how do you develop the trust in a market where everyone is always trying to convince somebody that they need something more, right? Like people that are listening to this are probably like, I'm getting bombarded with supplement pitches on a regular basis. Like, how do you differentiate?
Well, especially as a practitioner now, I mean, the one thing that's, the armchair quarterback now with AI can look like they know what they're talking about, right? And so you only need to scratch a little level below that. And it could be any domain. It could be training. It could be, and so, in sport or in clinical practice, to build trust, you need 2 things. You need authenticity and vulnerability. Right. And for us, that authenticity piece is just the work we've done in sport over the years. Now, our biggest challenge is a lot of that we can't even talk about because some of the biggest clubs and the biggest athletes in the world are taking our product, and you might be able to see it by the color of the drink, but you're not going to see necessarily the label because we're, still a young company. But that authenticity piece is huge for us. and we'll keep telling that story. And then I think the vulnerability piece is, at a one-to-one level, it's, letting your guard down a little bit. And I think that's where, as a brand, trying to find that sweet spot of, with the customer, trying to let them understand that, even the best athletes in the world struggle with things that all of us humans struggle with, right? Like whether there's challenges at home, whether it's as simple as, hey, that lady who's an Olympian, she struggles with eating the right thing at breakfast too, So those are kind of two of the bigger levers with building authenticity. I think sometimes that's, we try to fast track that a lot of times to kind of show people. Whereas I think hopefully for us anyway, of just having lived it is going to help to come through in what we put out. And it's great that we have a tremendous team on that side because, my expertise lies in the science and the practitioner side and not so much on that side of things.
Speaking about authenticity, what are some of the things you've tried that have just not worked in the building of the business?
Well, I think it's, I think like any young company, I think initially there was certain activations, certain individuals that you think had sort of a broad reach or broad touch. Our instincts from the start were probably always to double down on people that had some type of relationship with us because they would just care a little enough to execute or to go that extra little bit for us. Because anytime you're starting something out, you need to extract as much value as you can out of it. And
right.
People who know you or people who care a bit more are going to do that. And so I think that's one where we got pulled in a certain direction of, trying to, like we talked about, almost like fast track and, hey, let's pay this person and it didn't work out at all. And at the end of the day, that sort of comes down to the idea of that they weren't as bought in as we thought we were. We were a little bit outside of our values as well. And so that's one where just the iteration of being able to always come back to those values, like what are we about? What makes us different? And that's been really exciting just to see how we communicate our brand and with even, the marketing and everything that's coming out now, because you're really being able to feel that a little bit more as the external consumer. That's always the toughest part I find as the founder of all the things that we're doing behind the scenes and the amazingness of all these touch points we have. Yep. But if you're just somebody who saw us from nowhere and just looked at the website, you're like, none of that comes through. Right. So there's that level of, in the initial stages of frustration, or you're always impatient. I think that's where having just those, being really clear with what the values are. And at least then you've got that North Star to keep guiding, like, okay, back to our showing up. All right, well, we're not there yet, but it was a great saying, you're either moving towards the mountain or away from it to kind of, you don't need to hit the goal every day. And so that was big for us of just saying, okay, let's get a little bit closer. And then like a flywheel or centripetal force, like it starts to compound interest. We're starting to see a lot of those benefits that took some time to lay down.
Quick one before we get back into it. If you're going to be in Chamonix for UTMB week, I'm hosting a live panel called Tech in Running on Wednesday of race week. We're getting into the stuff I love talking about: data, AI, wearables, and where the human still beats the algorithm. It's brought to you by the team at Training Peaks. If you want in, just email me at john@forthelong.run and I'll send you everything you need to know. That's john@forthelong.run. Come say hi. Part of what you just shared, I just released a podcast today with Des Linden, and we talked about her brand partnerships, and her framework for partnering is basically what you're talking through. She said, I don't work with brands that give me a script. I know if I'm partnering with you, I know the product. I know the product because I've been using it. And so it's hard sometimes to stay true to that framework when someone's, waving a check in front of your face. Yeah. But ultimately on the athlete or on the creator side, at least from where I sit, the investment of authenticity, you may lose some opportunity in the short term, but you're building that credibility in the long run, for the long run, so that the people that follow you know that what you're doing is legit and you're not just, chasing a check. So it's nice to hear that on the brand side, because on the athlete or creator side, we talk about that all the time.
Yeah, it's always that push-pull of wanting that kind of, everybody wants that quick success or like that real inflection point. But like you said, there's nothing that beats people that you're partnering with really caring. It's like saying in sport that's pretty simple. They got to give a shit.
Right.
You can have the best team in the world, but if they don't all care for each other and want to fight for each other on the court or on the field, you're not going to win. There's so many examples of that over, these sort of all-star teams that show up and don't play well together. And I think when you're a young business, I think the more everyone's rowing in the same direction and really in it for
Great
each other.
book.
Yeah, there you go. It's massive. I mean, it's such a game changer because now every little gain is amplified.
Yeah. So, for example, or for context, we have a partnership through Long Run Labs with two of the podcasts
Yep.
in the network, and one of them is Brady Holmer through Run Long Run Healthy.
Yep.
And Brady's been using the product for a long time, and so for him, he's able to speak authentically to the use of the product. And Amanda Brooks is a running coach. She's asked about this kind of stuff constantly, and so she loved having a resource that she can refer her athletes to because she gets this question all the time.
And again, as a practitioner, this is the nice part for me is like you get people who take it and they actually see the benefit. And like you said, they don't have to sell anything or whatnot. It's like they use it because it works. And therefore, it just becomes something that they can talk about and they don't have to follow a script. Now that's not always as easy to do all the time. And as you grow, it gets tougher and tougher, but finding those folks is so key. And, Brady's been great. And anybody who's, for us, if you're pushing yourself to that level, you can feel the product even more in terms of the benefit. And it's the same idea with people who are just, again, long days, not sleeping, under high stress. Like, you're going to feel the effects more because there's more insufficiencies. And you almost want to think of those things as almost like fuel tanks or buckets, like they're being constantly drained by the demands of the day. Right. And, as a practitioner, you always want to be letting people know, right, like the fueling side and the movement side and the lifestyle side, like all those things matter, but we're always trying to, again, automate as much as we can. And if people can feel like, okay, I've ticked that box for all the big rocks in terms of micronutrition, then, all the better.
So if we were sitting and presenting to Shark Tank, you would have talked through how the product works, why it works, who's buying it, the number of times that person buys in a year, the number of people that are on a subscription versus a one-time consumer. Their obvious next question would be, do you push this one product as hard as you possibly can and never do anything else? Or do you create an brand extension and plus ups and fill-ins and things you can add to the drink mix? How do you think about that? And how do you think about the ability to focus and do one thing really well or help people customize their experience with your brand?
It's a great question. I think it's one that, again, knowing what it is that you're trying to solve for is always the first place to come back to, because it's easy to get pulled in the directions of let's add this and let's tag that. And because there is money to be made in these things. And so, for us in sport, it's called an athlete centered model where all the different practitioners and modalities are on the periphery and the athletes in the middle. Right. And so we're all there. It helps to keep the focus as a metaphor on the athlete, right? We're all there for the athlete. So for us with the ProBlend's at the center in terms of that's really your hub. And we do have other products that are, the spokes on the wheel that complement that. Again, for me, they come out of practice and how to best apply it in a way that's real world driven and not just kind of things to add to your basket at the checkout. And so, so we've got some exciting things. We're always trying to solve for real problems in the sense of where are the friction points. So we've got some novel things that we've actually developed that, hopefully soon will be coming down the road. We got some things that are tried and true fundamentals that there's just a different spin on, again, the most important thing for me, which is the execution part. Like the trouble with nutrition is once you tell someone the benefits or what something does, every single thing in nutrition sounds amazing, right? Like this vitamin and they give me more of that and I'll have some of this, but it's how does it fit into a person's life and how can they repeat it? And what does have, the biggest magnitudes of effect? Like, let's start with those things and not chase people down to this thing where, you talk about peptides or whatever, like these things that have marginal to no potential benefit and, big potential risks or negative benefit to these things. Are like, we know these things work and there's very little, if any, risks and people aren't doing them. So that's where we will be focusing on kind of being able to do that. And again, just help people to execute on it is the big thing.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of product extensions or extensions from brands as a way to sell more to their consumers, but it's because that consumer already trusts them and they're looking for the consolidation, right? So 10 years ago, we were working with GU and at Insight Tracker, and we were running a testing program. GU was providing a bunch of their pro athletes, about 10 athletes a year with quarterly blood testing.
Cool.
So GU was executing 40 blood tests a year. They did this for 2 or 3 years, and they started noticing that most of their athletes were deficient in the same things. Those things were iron, vitamin D, and magnesium. You could have said, like, you would have guessed those and been right.
Yep.
And they were also making recommendations for probiotics. So instead of continuing to recommend Clean Athlete, and I don't think
Other
Momentous
products.
was even a brand at the time, but like all these other brands, they were like, why don't we just make this and provide it to our athletes? And so it was really cool to see the product innovation come from need versus like, let's just make more stuff so we can sell it. They were solving a problem. And so it feels like the situation you're in is you're able to cover 80%. And then the remaining 20% is, does somebody want creatine? Does somebody want a probiotic? Does somebody want iron or something that can't exist in a powdered form, kind of a thing? And there's another modality of way to take it in.
Well, that's just it. And certain things that we didn't include in the Pro Blend were things that were more personalized. So creatine being one of them, like you might need 5 grams. I might be taking 10 grams. For females, we might be giving them 3 grams. So the dosing's different. And that was always a challenge with typical supplements, is like once you start multiplying or dividing, it doesn't always add up. And then there are certain things that as a practitioner, are just better absorbed and utilized as a food, like calcium, right? Most people should be getting calcium from their food. Iron's another one. Iron, you can take supplemental iron, but when we want to move the needle with Olympic level female athletes, we weren't using just iron supplements, right? We were doubling down on the food sources. You'd have an athlete who's eating red meat twice a week. Okay, well, we got to increase that. And there's, a lot of questions that come with that, but those are some of the ways of really impacting. And so, I totally agree of being able to see where those problems are, build the trust in the thing that you're, the kind of hero product or the main thing. And then from there, it just gets a lot easier to then because we have an unflavored product as well, which is always interesting because it's a difficult one as a brand to lead with.
Right.
It's like, what did you think of that? It tastes of nothing, whereas our orange is, it's tangy orange. It tastes great. And so that's one for us where even now the orange is kind of leading and the unflavored becomes something that people get into. We use it a lot in team sport because if you're having a chocolate protein shake after training, you put a scoop in, it covers all your micronutrition. If you're having a raspberry smoothie in the morning, it still tastes like raspberries, right? But I think it's like you said, if once they understand your product and the value add and what it solves for, it gets easier then to be adding the smaller things that help to fill in the gaps.
Let's talk about the accelerant of the company itself, or the things that have made it possible. How did you think about fundraising and capital to actually make this thing a viable business?
Yeah, I mean, between Paul and I, with all the years in sport and different connections, that was the initial support. It was from a small group of investors. Thankfully, we've been able to use those funds pretty diligently, and again, through the networks, just be bringing people on board the team that are, just really punching above their weight. And, in those early days, working for us for pennies on the dollar to what they would normally be getting. Right. And so, and not everyone's going to do that, obviously. And so that's a moment where it's a litmus test for who kind of, for lack of a better term, gives a shit and really supports the thing you're trying to do. Now, obviously, you can't do that for too long because people need to pay the bills and feed their families. And so, that was the initial way for us. And now as we're growing and scaling, there's a few different potential opportunities. And so, we've got to put our heads together and figure out, the best way to go, for us and how we want to grow it.
Did you see the network you had as an opportunity, not just for capital, but for distribution as well? Like these people who are now putting their money in, they become incentivized to share the story. And instead of you paying them to promote, they're paying you to promote.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of that in a sense of as a practitioner. I mean, you spend most of your time and career kind of giving to your patients, clients, athletes, and never really asking for much in return. So for me, it was almost like the first time you ever kind of asked for somebody to say, hey, do you mind, taking this or giving it to this person or whatever. And that was a really nice feedback loop of people saying, oh, absolutely, of course. Because you're not the one constantly asking for stuff. And in the pro sport world, they do get a lot of people constantly asking them for things. And,
if you've just given value for decades and never
asked for anything. Once you ask for that one thing and you never ask for anything, then that tends to resonate. I think that goes across other domains as well. And so, again, for me, being more on that practitioner clinical side, that was one where, obviously from the business side, that's something that practice that happens a lot, but I still think it's a really good take home of like when you're providing real value for people over time, and then you build that relationship, and then finally you do need, some support or some assistance that would be really beneficial. It's amazing how, you start to get that love back. So that was really big for us in terms of just athletes spreading the word, practitioners. Yeah.
So you think you'll be raising some money next? What does that process look like?
Yeah, again, I mean, there's a few different options. There's a few different paths for us to go down, and I think in the coming months here we'll probably have some clarity on it. But it's it's an exciting time because there's different possibilities. But then there's with each potential lane that you're choosing, there's positives and negatives, and so you've got to kind of weigh, raising more funds versus doing it on your own, bootstrapping. And so, but it's fun. I mean, it's great problem to have, with the brand and the company doing well and trying to figure out, what we do next.
Yeah. I've worked for a company that was bootstrapped. I've worked for VC backed companies, and wildly different, feeling of how the company kind of feels day to day. And
yeah. And then for us, like we want, you got a vision for what you're trying to solve for. And so it's like, we want to follow that through,
But if you look at a company like AG1, they're doing hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, if not more.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's different ways of doing it. It's, got to find the one that resonates and stays true to, again, who you are and what you're trying to solve for.
What does success look like to you?
I mean, success for me has always been impacting lives, right? Like it's great working with athletes and helping them achieve certain things, but you could say it's almost more satisfying when people who struggle with, diabetes, hypertension, health conditions, mood conditions, you help them put the wheels back on and feel better and be able to perform in their life. And so that was really, again, even with ProBio, that's an extension of what we're trying to do. And so that's kind of the fun part of being able to build some momentum is we're getting more and more feedback now from the clients. We've got various types of surveys. We got big plans on, research that we're going to be doing. So it's going to be a real sort of living and breathing feedback loop with our customers, which is something that's, you don't see in the space.
Speaking of giving value, adding value, helping people improve, let's do a little payoff for the people that have made it this far.
Yeah.
What are most endurance athletes doing wrong? What should they think about differently as it relates to nutrition?
Well, it's interesting because endurance athletes are generally a pretty compliant group. Like when you work in team sport, normally the higher the skill of a certain sport, like basketball or soccer, you can make it all the way to the pros without thinking about too much of how you train or your nutrition. Because if you're 6'8" and have 44-inch vertical leap and can run like the wind, you can eat pretty much whatever you want and, train a certain way and
until you get injured.
Make it all the way to the top.
Yeah.
Until you get to the middle part of your career and the early part of your career. So endurance athletes are great because they're really compliant. I think there's probably a couple things. I mean, this one's getting better now, but getting enough total fueling in was always so when we talk about macronutrients, I use the 3 T's model, which is basically the total. So when you have carbohydrates, what's your total for the day? How are you timing that through the day? And typically that'll look like more complex away from training and then more, simpler, what I call fast carbs around the exercise. And then the type, what different types are we using? We use that with protein as well. And getting that total fueling in is just such a key part. And it's difficult for people to really appreciate, how much fuel they need. And so when you go back to like the 2010s and the low fat and the low carb wars and all of that, and of course, more and more research came out, and ultimately you could say with confidence that once you equate for protein and you equate for total energy, aka calories, it doesn't matter if you're going low carb or low fat, right? You've got different strategies like clubs in your golf bag. And so I think that's one where whichever way you were leaning previously, you could help people to kind of figure out, and this comes back to the personalization part of once you have your big rocks in place. So like, this is how much protein you need and total fuel. Now we can start to personalize to, does that person feel better on more carbohydrate, maybe less carbohydrate, but getting enough total energy. And people forget that's the biggest signal, right? Like people can have a decent amount of sugar in their diet. If they're in a deficit and moving, you can improve prediabetes, right? Like, and so sometimes these simple heuristics, these simple rules of like sugar bad, yeah, like it helps generally the general population, but the more athletic you get, it's just not that simple. And you get people who then, struggle getting enough in, and it is amazing when you see them, when you fuel somebody adequately. And again, you see this maybe a bit more sometimes in female sport, just the change of like the performance in the training, the performance in the field, how they feel. And now you don't even have to, you talk about building habits. Like once they feel that for themselves, then all of a sudden being able to be consistent with that, it sticks pretty quick.
Love it. Thanks for indulging me on that one. What surprised you most about launching and building this brand? I know you're, not on the other end of it, but you're, a year and a half, 2 years in. What's been the biggest surprise in the entrepreneur life?
I think one of the benefits of being like a practitioner is that you sort of, even though you're on the clinical side, it's a little bit similar in the sense of I've always been a consultant. So you're always having to gain you got to solve people's problems to then get more clients, right? Like it's not like you're working for, it's great that we have GPs that work for hospitals and, salaries and whatnot. That's obviously needed. But like when you've got to do something well to get somebody to come back and pay for it again, I think that's, if practitioners are listening in or people who are listening who come from the medical side, that's a big key. And I think, just understanding that it takes time, and you got to have, we always talk about these days, we used to have to convince people to be process driven. And now it's, with the internet of things, it's everywhere of like process. But again, it's like where the rubber meets the road, when you're actually in it, it's hard to really say, oh, great, I'm in the process mode and like things aren't going well.
Right.
You know what I mean? But you need to just double
trust. Yeah.
You got to double down on like, what do the wins look like today? And then the next day solve those problems. And so I think that's been, the biggest eye opener again of like, if you say it all the time, and it's one thing to do it for a client or an athlete to help them stick with the process. But when you're in it yourself, again, it's like, it's a different animal. And so that's where it's nice when you can actually execute on that and go, okay, we're picking up pace. We're, seeing the progress. It's it's a good thing.
I love that. I'm about a year in on my own entrepreneurial journey of having left my full-time job. And awesome. I was writing a reflection piece that probably will be out by the time this episode airs, so I'll link to it. But in the piece, I wrote something to the effect of like, those who were listening carefully could hear me asking in my podcast, like, how did you break stasis? And how, because I knew I wanted to make a change and I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I became obsessed with asking people who had made a change and had taken the leap, how did you do it? And so I shared that I'm writing this, and a bunch of other people really like asked that same thing of like, how did you do it?
Yeah.
So I'm curious for you, how did you decide to take the leap to go all in on building something of your own?
It's interesting. There's a group, a friend of mine out in the UK, Andy Kane, has a company called Zero. He works with a lot of executives and folks, people that are, quite successful in their domains, but don't have a level of fulfillment. And so it's a little bit what you're talking about. Then some of those people who are, maybe doing really well as a lawyer or a doctor.
It's like the third quadrant. You're really good at what you do. You get paid well for it, but it's not satisfying and it's not stimulating. Yeah,
you've gotten to like the top of the bell curve, so to speak, and it's no longer. And so even just seeing those folks from the outside, the nice house, the nice car, kids are happy, like, oh, this person must be. But even as a clinician, I'd work with people, which on the personal side, that might all be great, but then on the personal side, they're struggling. Like, it's like anything in life, there's all these multiple factors. And so I think that idea of fulfillment and really trying to tackle things that are going to help to round everything out for you. And it's different for everybody in terms of those quadrants that you talk about of what's impactful. But I think that's one where, for me, that was an issue I wanted to scratch. And it was always, clinical work's great, but you are dealing with people one-to-one, and it's, after 20 years of doing it, it's tiring, right? Like you're dealing with people's challenges and problems, and it's fulfilling at the same time, but you're taking on board a lot. And for me, it was always finding the right people to partner with. It's one of those things where it's almost like, when you see it or you feel it.
Yep. Of
like, there's this moment, there's this synergy, and you're like, okay, back to that idea of like, you got the teammates in here who are really going to work for each other.
Yep.
And so then that for me, that was the moment when, Paul had come to me with some ideas of what he wanted to do. We were batting around, then what we were going to solve for. And then, it just sort of like you light the match at that point, and, we were both on the same track. So, but I think it comes back to that notion of that fulfillment of what you're talking about, of really having a chance to like looking 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road, like what do you want your life to look like? And not always in like I want, again, like objective things like this house or this car, but even for me, I've got 3 kids at home. Like I want to walk my kids to school and be able to pick them up afterwards, because that time, once it's gone, right? Your kids are only little for a certain amount of time. And there's a magic to that. There's like the wonder, and obviously there's lots of hard stuff as well. But so yeah, when you start ticking those boxes, I think it's great. And back to that gut feeling thing of, okay, now's the moment. But I totally appreciate it, especially if you're working with a salary job and they got the benefits and you built that up over many, many, many years. That's probably a different animal than even I had to deal with, because now you're almost like jumping off the cliff and.
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating, and that's exactly how I thought through it. I was like, I have a well-paying W-2 job that people would kill to have, and I'm gonna give it up. Yeah. But I'd been there a long time, and I wasn't fired up about it anymore, and it didn't feel fair to my coworkers, to my boss, to like all these other people, to customers. And there were just other boxes I wanted to check and other pursuits I wanted to have. And so like we scheduled this podcast 4 hours ago. You were dropping off a cooler and equipment.
Post Boulder.
Yeah. And it was like, oh, are you free at 2:00? Yeah. I have no one to answer to. So let's do it. And like, to me, that's the exciting part. Freedom is owning your own schedule. Wealth is owning your own schedule. And like, to me, that's what I'm building for. And that's a really exciting thing worth chasing in my opinion, because it's like time is the only thing we can't get more of. And so to me, time is the most valuable asset.
Yeah. And it's great when you get to that level of clarity too. And again, you sort of come to a certain point where you're like, all right, I've solved all the challenges and the where I was at, and it was great. But you're like, there's this moment of
I definitely didn't solve all the challenges.
Or, you definitely, you get to a certain level of like satisfaction, or like you put time in. There's always going to be more challenges for sure. But it is nice when you kind of, once you start feeling that knot in the stomach a little bit, or that level of like, that's like lights in the dashboard of the car for folks listening. And that's kind of the
check
time.
Engine.
That's time when you're kind of like got to revisit, like, is this still the thing for me?
Yeah. Love it. Thanks for sharing that. Appreciate this chat. Thanks for the work you do for athletes and the pursuit of better and progress for so many people. Where can we find you and ProBio if people want to check it out?
Yeah, likewise. Listen, appreciate all the work you're doing and having me on. And if folks want to check out more, probionutrition.com, you can check out what we're doing. It's gonna be loads of great stuff coming out over the next 6 to 12 months. So definitely, keep tabs with us. And then, on the personal side, drbubbs.com, you can check out the consulting and whatnot. But exciting times ahead.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Long Run Labs. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's building something of their own. We'll be back next Tuesday with more stories at the intersection of endurance and entrepreneurship from the people shaping the outdoor industry in ways big and small. Until then, keep showing up, keep asking questions, and we'll see you out there.